waits for you, Envoy. Go meet it.
Avowed was one of my most anticipated games of the whole entire year. Originally, when it was first announced and after the first few trailers, I was looking forward to it, but not that much because I liked but didn't love the Outer Worlds. But when a lot of people got early access to Avowed a few months ago, they were hyping it up, saying it was well written, choices felt meaningful, and the gameplay was surprisingly great. And all of those reactions made my anticipation skyrocket. Which, by the way, if you know me, you know I don't typically let that happen. I like to go into games as blind as humanly possible. I don't like to watch many trailers after the initial ones. I don't watch or read any full reviews before I form my own opinions, which is still the case here, by the way. And when a game does launch, I completely avoid the internet like a plague, as to not accidentally see review scores or the general opinion of the online masses. But I don't know, something about Avowed just made me give into it, give into the hype, give into the marketing. I think it's because I've been so disappointed by so many AAA RPGs lately, Dragon Age the Veilguard, Star Wars Outlaws. So I just needed to have hope. I needed to be hyped about something, and I guess my brain chose Avowed to be the chosen one. But anyway, Avowed finally came out in early access, and I've been playing it, which means I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys. But before I get into my thoughts, I want to know yours. If you've played Avowed yet, hit me up with your initial impressions in the comments down below. And if you haven't, tell me if you plan to play it in the future or if it's a game you're gonna pass on, ignore completely. But yeah, I'm gonna jump into the review. I'm gonna show you guys some raw gameplay, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're new here, I talk about video games all the time. I do day one reviews very, very often. This was going to be a day one review, but early access didn't start until 1 p.m. my time. And I didn't think 1 p.m. would give me enough time to play it and form proper first impressions thoughts, so I decided to wait a few days. But I typically do day one reviews, but I do other video game discussions as well. I just love sharing my passion for gaming here, and I hope you join me. But enough with this introduction. Let's talk about Avowed. But first things first, this is a first impressions review. I have been playing it for a few days now, and I have a good chunk of hours in, more than most of my first impressions reviews, but still, this is a first impressions review. I will be uploading a follow-up video, though, later this week or next week. It'll be much longer, more in-depth full reviews, so look forward to that. And this video will also be spoiler-free. I'm not really going to talk about the main story much in this video. Again, I will in the next one, but not here. And all the gameplay that you're seeing is from the first handful of hours and only the first 2 locations. But anyway, I want to start with the positives because so far, I am really, really liking Avowed. It's not blowing my mind as of yet. So far, it is not the chosen one. It's not the RPG that's gonna put to shame all the other recent RPG disasters, but it's still good. In fact, it's really good, especially when compared to those aforementioned recent RPG disasters. For one thing, it seems very consistent across all of its core features. For example, I know I'm in the minority here, but I liked Dragon Age Veilguard's combat and art style, but I hated the writing and the story, and that made that whole game wicked inconsistent. Another example, I loved Starfield's core hook and world, and I liked the gameplay, and I really liked the story, but I didn't care much for the maps and the exploration, which made that game also pretty lopsided. And Star Wars Outlaws had some great sound design and some pretty cool worlds, but pretty clunky gameplay and awkward level designs and stealth, but you get my point. In my opinion, a lot of recent RPGs have just been wildly inconsistent across their main pillars, But Avowed doesn't seem to have that problem. The world is equal to the exploration, which is equal to the combat, which is equal to the story, which is equal to the fun factor. And that's not to say that all of that stuff is amazing, by the way. I actually so far don't think any of it is amazing, but it's all good. And everything being good makes Avowed a much more solid game than a lot of its competitors on the market right now. And again, that's not to say that those aspects of the game might not become amazing the more that I play, or drop off significantly, but right now it's all just pretty good. And we're in a day and age, unfortunately, where a AAA game being pretty good is something I will take happily. Again, I'm not excusing it, I wish it was better, but I'm just saying that as a way to get the point across that I'm having a lot more fun with this game so far than a lot of other recent big AAA RPGs. But yeah, let's get into more things I like about the game so far. I'm actually digging the tone and the vibe. I didn't think I would. When Avowed was originally revealed, I was hoping it would be a bit darker, a bit more moody than the Outer Worlds. I like fantasy of all sorts, but I like it the most when it's got a noticeable shade of darkness to it. Then when we got more trailers and we saw more gameplay, I was disappointed that Obsidian was going for a more whimsical, magical, fantastical route with its tone. But now I like that a lot. It matches the world, it matches the story, and it's also just refreshing to be in a universe that's a bit more on the charming side. This might be a generic cliche statement, but in terms of its tone and its vibe, I would liken it to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and the Fable franchise. It evokes those same kinds of feelings from me, not just because of its art design and the tone, but the way it presents itself to the player, like the sound effects of treasure chests, the way you find weapons in scenic locations. Again, the game just has a lot of charm, a lot of whimsy, and I like that. Now let's talk about gameplay a bit, the core combat specifically. It's really good. It's much better than your typical Bethesda Obsidian style RPG in my opinion. Combat was never the selling point of those games. Bethesda makes some of the best Western RPGs on the market, but somehow the combat always feels like it comes from some cheap indie title where hitboxes are broken, the combat animations are trash. It never feels like your blades or your bullets connect. You know what I mean? If you've ever played a Bethesda game, I'm sure you know what I mean. And for the most part, I feel like the same thing can be said about the Outer Worlds, but that's definitely not the case here. Avowed has a much stronger emphasis on combat. Fighting enemies feels weighty and punchy. Same with the long-ranged combat as well. Blocking, parrying, using your shield all feels good. And so far, I've used a bunch of different weapons, swords, axes, rifles, bows, giant hammers, magical wands, and they all feel fun to use in their own way. But so far, I haven't used that many of the same type of weapon. So I haven't used that many swords or that many hammers to directly compare them against each other. I'm really hoping they feel different. I hope all weapons of the same type don't just feel like carbon copies of each other. But next up, I think third person works really well in this game. First person is definitely better tuned and the better experience overall. And that's coming from a dude, by the way, who prefers third person games by a country mile, but still, third person here works and feels a lot better than I think most people will be expecting. Sometimes the hitboxes and depth of field will be a little wonky, but it's not too bad. It's still better than most games that let you switch between the two styles. But anyway, now let's get into some of the red flags that Avowed is waving so far, because even though I'm liking it a lot, it's not exactly giving the strongest first impression. So the first thing that I hope improves the more that I play is the characters. So far, they're not that great. The main cast, the characters, they're just a little boring, a little bland, your companions. Luckily, they're not annoying and they're not cringy as hell. I'd rather a boring companion than an annoying one, but still, I was really hoping they'd be memorable and be really likable, but so far that's just not happening yet. But again, I'm still pretty early. I haven't met everyone yet, and there's still plenty of time for the people I have met to become better, but I will say your companions in combat are pretty good. They're not indestructible, they can go down, which I like a lot. I hate when your allies never ever die. It breaks the illusion that they're people, that they're characters. When that starts to happen, I just start viewing them as video game pixels, but again, not the case here. They can go down, they can lose in battles, and also, they don't just copy whatever it is you're doing. Another thing I appreciate a lot. There's been a few times when one of my companions would just be fighting off enemies and I saw that they were handling it on their own, so I just started looting. I love that. I hate when enemies ignore your companions and just target you. And on the flip side, I hate when you stop fighting and your teammates just follow suit. They copy whatever it is you're doing. Another thing that I hope gets better is the actual exploration. Again, I think the world is visually pretty and the designs are pretty great as well, but so far exploring it is leaving a little bit to be desired. I knew this game wasn't open world going into it. Instead, it's open area, and I have no problem with that at all, but it's still so far a bit too linear for what I like in a game like this. Quests often bring you in very linear paths, and almost every point of interest has a quest to coincide with it, which I personally don't like when that happens. Don't get me wrong, I don't want a game to have a surplus of useless open space. I don't want map padding just for the sake of it, but there should be a good balance between locations for quests and locations you'll need to find on your own if you ever want to see them. When a game has a quest tied to almost every single place of interest, it decentivizes exploration and free roaming because you know a quest will just take you there anyway. So far, again, I'm still early in the game, but the quest location to find it yourself locations aren't balanced that well. Also, it's worth mentioning, but this game also looks kind of plasticky. I remember a critique a lot of people had with the Outer Worlds was that the world looked like it was made of plastic a lot of the time, and monsters looked like blow-up beach toys. It didn't really bother me then, and it doesn't bother me now. I actually think it matches the tone of Avowed a lot more than it matched the tone of the Outer Worlds, but still, if you didn't like it there, you won't like it here. But yeah, that's my quick and brief thoughts, my first impressions after playing Avowed for a few days. Again, I want to know what you're thinking of the game in the comments down below, and once again, I will be making a follow-up review. Playing Avowed is pretty much all I'm going to be doing for the next week, so look forward to my full review where I'm really going to get into it. It's going to be a lot more in depth. So once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.
Then raw.